Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, as I said last week, I want to keep doing these videos every week while I'm staying inside, while I'm not super transit accessible, because I think it's enjoyable. There's lots of news going on, particularly in Ontario. I will get back to regular videos, but I'm not guaranteeing that's going to happen anytime too soon. But if you like hearing the news about transit in Canada, you like hearing maybe my opinions about that news, then you can feel free to watch these videos and enjoy them. So I want to get started with some news from Vancouver. Now, the kind of predominant news and most interesting news, I think, is that we now know the final Broadway subway station names. I think this is a little unusual for them to release the station names this early, because I remember the Evergreen line and maybe even the Canada line names were being changed late into construction because, I mean, they hadn't put the signs up, the maps hadn't necessarily all gone out and that sort of thing. And so it's nothing too significant. I believe Fairview is now Oak, and now the Great Northern Way station is Great Northern Way Emily Carr. I think it's a cool name. I think someone as significant as Emily Carr, it's cool to have a station named after her. I think names of stations that are named after significant people are actually really cool. It's one of my favorite style of station names. There's a lot of them in Montreal, there's some in Toronto, there's some in Vancouver as well. And I think it's a cool way of kind of honoring people and honoring their memory. And it's just awesome in terms of how it kind of connects the community, you know, of people in the area and people who made a significant influence with something that's quite permanent, like a transit station. And so, yeah, it's pretty awesome to hear. Beyond that, not much to say on the Broadway subway. It's exciting to see that it's going forward. Stations are still annoyingly small, but at the end of the day, I think that with a subway, well, yes, it's hard to extend platforms in the case of like the Canada line. Adding new entrances is not really out of the question. Is it expensive? Yes. Is it painful and difficult? Yes. But can it be done? As we've seen in like Toronto, for example, of course it can be done. Particularly when new developments happen, if you're digging a foundation down and you're pretty close to the station box or to where the platforms are, it's not really inconceivable or very hard to just punch a hole through and connect things up. I know that probably portions of this line will be happening in kind of weird locations where it might not be super easy to link up to developments, but it's just a nice thing that can happen in the future. And so as long as they're accessible from day one, there's two exits. If another entrance really needs to be added, be it because there's a development and they want a connection or because there's just demand, then it's totally doable. So it's not the end of the world. It's good to see that the platforms will be 80 meters long. They'll support 5-car Expo/Millennium Division trains, which is exciting. For me, part of the excitement is that I often think about like the resilience of the transit system, and right now there's not really a resilient route between most of the system that's relatively new, the Millennium Line and the Saperton branch and stuff, and downtown, because it turns out the main connector is the Expo Line and the old Terminal Avenue section, which I really don't have much faith in case of an earthquake. So I think having this kind of quote-unquote redundant section is really useful, and it also means that people who are taking the Millennium Line don't need to change at Commercial Broadway, which is kind of a crappy transfer. Cool station, as I've said in my video where I talked about it being one of my favorite stations out there, but the transfer is quite tall, there's a horizontal distance to it, and so I think having a nice weather-protected underground connection to the Canada Line to go downtown will be fantastic. Probably more so not in rush hour, but in the off-peak hours, because in rush hour, I think those Canada Line trains are going to be very saturated. Anyways, I think that's the news for that. And so then the next piece of news out of Vancouver is that there was some more information released on the Suri Langley SkyTrain. I kind of hate the name. To kind of preempt all of this, if you read some of my blog posts, which I hope you have, I hope you've checked out the website, then you'll know that I'm originally from Langley, British Columbia. Langley is a small suburban town. It really kind of perfectly represents everything I think that's wrong with modern North American suburbs. It's really car dependent, it's super sprawly, it's not high density, it's not well transit accessible. There's not really good biking facilities in much of the quote unquote city. It's two cities that are, it's a weird situation. But yeah, the Suri Langley SkyTrain isn't actually a full project right now all the way to Langley. It just goes into kind of like the Fleetwood area of Surrey, which is about halfway to Langley from where the SkyTrain currently ends in Suri Central. I think that's a much more logical endpoint right now. And honestly, I think that Langley should kind of have to get its act together with regard to transit before it's given the kind of quote-unquote privilege of having rapid transit. The area that the rapid transit is meant to connect in Langley is truly horrendous. It's full of really wide streets, many of which don't have sidewalks, giant big box stores and parking lots. It's just not a pleasant area, and I think that Langley has to kind of preemptively show that they're willing to provide feeder transit service. I mean, I know that it happens through TransLink, but Langley needs to really be advocating more for that and maybe helping to fund some of the infrastructure and maybe some of the service before I think that it really makes sense to give them a SkyTrain connection as well. It's another situation where I don't think that we need to be focusing on developing whole new dense areas and serving them with transit. I agree that it's valuable in certain places, but Langley is so far to the east of Metro Vancouver that I feel like the value of it becoming this dense, quote-unquote, urban hub is a lot less than, like, say, Suri Central, which is actually quite central in the region, and that's probably just going to end up with more people living further out into Langley, areas like Aldergrove, Brookswood, and kind of northeast Langley becoming more populated, which is just going to end up being sprawl. And I think it just doesn't necessarily make sense. We have a lot of density in other places that aren't currently served by rapid transit, like UBC, and I really would be disappointed to see SkyTrain to Langley before we see it to UBC, because I think that the business case is far better for UBC. There's already a ton of transit users, and also because we can serve the people of Langley a lot better right now with better bus service. And then when down the line there's demand and those bus services have picked up lots of people, it makes more sense to continue with the SkyTrain service. That being said, the station renders were released. They look good. They look basic, which is honestly all we really need. I think that in different cities like Toronto, for example, it's pretty clear that you learn this lesson that you shouldn't build gigantic subway stations, especially not in the suburbs. The Toronto-York Spadina subway extension costs like billions and billions of dollars to add 7 stations in the middle of industrial and business parks in a lot of it, and it doesn't make sense. And building these really minimal stations that can still provide the exact same passenger experience. Train shows up frequently, I step off the platform onto the train, I'm going where I want. I think it's a lot more logical than these giant cathedral-like transit stations that don't get all that much bus service and that are mainly for people to park their cars at, which might very well be the case on the Surrey-Langley extension, which is why it's good that they're not going to be these gigantic things. So that's the main TransLink news. Now there is a bit of BC Transit news I wanted to mention, which is that someone posted on the Discord that the Fraser Valley Express, also known as the FVX route, which connects kind of the eastern Fraser Valley like Abbotsford and Chilliwack to Langley, might be getting extended to the Millennium Line at Loki Town Centre. Now, what this is really interesting about this article that was shared, and I might link it below in the video, is that this route actually turns out to be turning a profit. It's quite infrequent. There's like hourly service at best, but basically it's just like a Nova bus that runs all the way from Abbotsford and Chilliwack to Langley on like an hourly basis, and then leads to a forced transfer. You've got to transfer onto another bus, a high-quality bus, the 555 Portman Express, which is a double-decker service, and then ride into the SkyTrain that way. But I think with the line being so infrequent and yet having pretty good ridership from what I can tell, I mean, it's more than recovering its costs, it makes a ton of sense to extend it directly to the SkyTrain. You're probably going to end up driving more ridership, which is fantastic. There's good bus infrastructure, which surely they'd be allowed to reuse, and with new HOV ramps being installed near Carval's Exchange, which is where the transfer point to the 555 used to be, I think that there could be a really good connection there. But then the buses can basically use the same infrastructure that the 555s use, which is the HOV lanes between Langley and all the way out to the Loki Town Centre station, which includes a special bus-only off-ramp, which is pretty cool. It just makes a lot of sense because lots of people are riding this bus already. Forcing them to transfer is just discouraging them from using the service. Providing a better connection to the SkyTrain makes a ton of sense, and so yeah, I think it's a great decision, and I hope to see it happen. Now, next up, we have some news in Edmonton, at least, which is that the Tawatina Bridge, I believe that's how it's pronounced, for the Valley Line LRT, the south east segment, was completed. Not much more news for that, other than I think the Valley line is a really cool line. I kind of prefer it to, say, the Eglinton line. It's kind of like the Finch line in my mind, but with higher capacities, since the trains are designed to go up to like 90 meters long. The reason I kind of prefer it to the Eglinton Crosstown is it's not trying to be two things at once. The Eglinton Crosstown is like this weird hybrid between a tramway and a metro. The Valley line is just really straight up a tramway, which isn't a bad thing. People are really out to get tramways, it seems, at least in the Vancouver area, and I think that they really can provide a lot of value. It's just about building your city to make sense with the transit. The same way that I think that, like a city like Paris, it has all these different transit modes, and Paris is pretty great for transit, and so are lots of other really European cities with multi-transit modes. And I think it's about how does this transit mode kind of meld with the way the city is designed. If you have really a dense area, or you have a densely packed corridor, or at least you're developing one, then a tramway makes tons of sense. You provide a really good service. Again, you have step-free access to the trains. They come pretty frequently. It's a smooth ride, and people get where they need to go. There's no changes in routes or diversions because they are a tramway. Then I think it's a great solution for certain types of problems, and I'm excited to see the project advance. It's kind of the same with the Green Line LRT in Calgary. I like it kind of in principle a bit more than the Eglinton Crosstown because, as far as I know, it's kind of going to be more like the Alberta LRTs, where there's crossing gates and a bit better grade separation and stuff for most of it. But, trying to mix these two different modes, I just don't think is great because, yeah, you get the cost of a tramway for much of the route, but then you still pay that expensive, like, subway level cost. I mean, the tunnel has to be basically the same size as if you used a small subway train, and yet you don't get all of the super high frequency or super high capacity of a subway. And so it feels like you're kind of giving up a lot when you do this kind of hybrid approach. So I'm not a huge fan of it. Next up, let's start in Quebec, because Ontario is always the most interesting and there's the most stuff going on. Sorry, Quebec, but some more pictures of the REM came out. It's kind of the same stuff that's been happening for a long time, more REM construction pictures. The stations in the median on the South Shore are coming along really well. They look fantastic. I really like the fully enclosed station design that they went for with the REM. It's great because Montreal gets cold and it's nice to have the climate control. It gets hot in the summer too, and so I'm pretty sure those stations will be air conditioned, and that's also very nice. But it feels more modern than kind of an open station. An open station is fine, I think, for like a traditional rail station, but I think if you're building rapid transit, you're already spending so much money on the infrastructure. Just enclosing it and making it really, like an airport terminal, really a seamless, easy experience where you don't have to feel like you're outside for a lot of the trip, that can be really beneficial. And I've talked to some people who are like, oh, it's nice to go outside when you're on your transit trip. And yeah, I agree, but is the median of a highway, or are a lot of places where transit stations are, the greatest places to be outside? And if that's the only time you're going to be outside, like, I don't know if it's the best experience. I think if a transit system can connect you to a really nice destination like a park, and you can go walk around like after work or on your lunch break, it's probably a better solution. But I like the modern look and the enclosed look of these stations. Apologies, I've been quite sick today and been trying to get this video out, but yeah, bear with me, please. So yeah, that's kind of the news out of Montreal. REM is coming along really well. The system looks really far along. It feels farther along than the Eglinton Crosstown, which is kind of the joke, right? Because the Eglinton Crosstown started construction in like 2011 or 2012, and it doesn't feel very far along. And then you have the REM in Montreal, which was proposed in like 2016, and it's already seemingly coming together on the South Shore. And so, really great project. I would be overjoyed to see something like the REM built in other Canadian cities. And it's something I've talked to people about, but talk about it here a bit. I think that the REM is such a beautiful evolution of what SkyTrain in Vancouver is. And I think SkyTrain in Vancouver has a lot of great features. The automated service, the smaller than, the giant subway trains of Toronto or some other cities, shorter than in Montreal. but yet still providing really frequent service, which allows it to still provide super high capacity. I just think it's great, and I feel like Montreal's system is really like the evolution of what SkyTrain provides. So the size of the trains is like a level up from the SkyTrain. It's the width of the Canada Line trains, but more like the length of the Expo and Millennium Line trains, so quite a bit more capacity. There's, I think, a better train design with longitudinal seating. That's a personal opinion, but I prefer the train design in general. I think it just looks more modern. It doesn't look like... I like it. That's a personal opinion, but I like the train designs more. It's powered by pantograph, which is arguably like a more modern system that allows for things like higher speed and higher voltages and such. Better performance in rough weather, which we know we've had issues with in Vancouver with at least the Canada Line. It has platform screen doors, so it really has like all the features that you're kind of like, it would be nice if the SkyTrain had that feature, and it's already built them in. And so it would be cool to see Montreal gets this, and other cities are like, I'd like to see that. For example, if Calgary were to build a REM like equivalent instead of the Green Line, which honestly, it wouldn't even be that hard. There's not that many grade crossings on the Green Line. It would cost more, but probably not that much more. It would be so many times better than the currently proposed, hybrid LRT plan. So I think things like that are really exciting, and I hope to see projects like the REM pop up. I mean, if Vancouver ever does another SkyTrain line, which surely it will, I think that building something that looks a lot more like the REM makes sense. So those are my thoughts on the REM. Now, on the Ontario side of things, there's not like a ton of news, but there's just progress going on. And I thought it was worth addressing some of the progress on projects that's going on. Some of those big projects that we're seeing progress on are the Davenport Diamond. The diversion track for trains and the new diamond has been put into place on the Barrie line, and so that allows for construction of what is really a giant rail overpass for the Barrie line, which heavy rail trains that are going to be going on a giant overpass over CP freight trains on the CP main line through Midtown Toronto. So that's a super exciting project to see progressing. The GO bus terminal in downtown Toronto at CIBC Square, which is like pretty much externally almost completely finished, it appears. Great looking skyscraper, one of the nicest looking skyscrapers in Canada, I think. So definitely recommend looking up CIBC Square. But in the base of it, which is really cool, there's a new GO bus terminal, as many people probably know, and it looks like that's coming along very nicely. Union Station on the whole is coming along pretty nicely. Seemed to be delayed again into 2021 now, which surely the local papers will have a field day with. They'll complain a lot about how giant projects should happen instantaneously and how they should be cheap and stuff. And obviously it's unfortunate and the project should happen faster, but at this point it's kind of like, it'll be done when it gets done and we'll enjoy it. And I guess because it's COVID right now, it's less important. Hopefully they're working hard while they have less people in there to finish the Bay Concourse. But I mean, Union Station is going to be fun for the media for a long time because the south section is going to be largely rebuilt, where the two southern platforms are. It's pretty not nice right now, to put it politically. The platforms are pretty standard. They are mostly covered, but they're not perfectly straight, and there's a lot of narrow passages, and you're like 2 inches from this giant train if you're standing in the wrong place on the platform. And so yeah, it's good to see them getting rebuilt to be wider. I think that it's underappreciated how fantastic it will be when Union Station is able to have dedicated platforms for lines. Right now it really sucks because it does feel kind of like an airport, where you have like your gates and you have to stand at that screen and wait until your gate comes for your flight, and then you've got to go line up somewhere. It will be great when there's just a sign and it says Lakeshore West Line or Stouffville Line, and you just go to that platform, and if you sit there and wait, a train will show up, and if you get on that train, it will take you to your destination. You don't have to worry about, kind of standing in the concourse waiting for your platform to be announced. It's 99% of the time going to be the standard platform, at least for that specific train at that time. But it's just an annoying system. I know that people will probably say, oh, it's because there's not enough room on the platform, which is, yes, that's the point. That's why they're building bigger platforms. So it's exciting to see that happening. I think long-term it's going to be a nice feature to have in Go. Hopefully, like long-term, there can be dedicated platforms at basically every station, so it's like, this platform is the northbound for this line, and this one is the southbound, or this is east, this is west. The expresses stop here, the local trains stop here. It's just a nicer system. It feels more like a metro, and I think people will enjoy it. And so that's fantastic to see. There's also been a lot of progress with the Finch and Hurontario LRTs. No vehicles or anything like that, but in the case of Finch, the OMSF, like the maintenance facility, is coming along really well. You can see the buildings are actually going up. In Hurontario, they're kind of leveling that area off still and getting ready to put the buildings up, but it's cool to see so much progress happening. Again, those LRTs are really more like tramways, but still I think they're going to be very nice lines to have, and they'll be super beneficial. Now, I want to end each of these quote-unquote episodes with a little bit of a topic that I think is important to think about in the future, or something I just want to talk about. And I think today's topic could be like resiliency for transit. Now, I talked a bit about it at the beginning, but I think that in Vancouver in particular, we don't think about earthquake resiliency enough. But I think that in general in Canada, not just in transit, but in general in infrastructure, we really need to think a lot more about resiliency against different acts of nature, disasters, that sort of thing. I think that when you hear that, you might think I'm a little crazy. I hope not, but we have just had like 10 days of terrible wildfire smoke in Vancouver, and I think what it shows you, and as someone who's lived in Vancouver for a lot of my life, wildfire smoke never used to be a thing, at least not on a regular basis, and now it's like every year there's wildfire smoke at some period during the summer. And I think that it's just really important that as issues like climate change start to really rear their heads, that we react to it in an intelligible way. When we're building new stations, enclosing them and having, AC and HEPA filtration on the intakes is like a good idea if we're building a transit system in an area where wildfire smoke tends to be a problem, like BC and Alberta. I think that having enclosed SkyTrain stations in the future is a smart thing to do for multiple reasons, but I think that enclosing for better air quality is something that you could even make the argument for in places like Toronto, where in a lot of areas the air quality is quite bad, especially in areas near highways, and so having enclosed stations could be beneficial from that standpoint. But then also you have to think about the fact that summers are going to get hotter and winters are going to become more erratic. So there could be really cold spells and then there could be warmer times. But having that enclosed station with air conditioning is going to be really helpful when you're in a hot Toronto or Montreal summer in particular. Obviously, Vancouver, it's less of an issue. Our summers don't get quite as hot as they do out east. But I think that thinking about transit investments like they're 100-year investments, because they are, makes a lot of sense. And I think that we're much too myopic and focused on the next couple of years and like, what is the impact of this transit system now? And we don't think enough about, in the future, how hard is it going to be for us to make it so that this thing is still really usable if there's a terrible forest fire and we have a month of bad forest fire smoke and people need to go out. They can't have the luxury of staying in their homes like it's possible for a couple days or a week. When it's a month, people still going to have to go outside, and providing facilities that are safe for people makes transit a viable option, and it makes it safe for people who don't have another option. And so I think that investing more in making transit systems resilient is super important. The same could be said in Toronto and Montreal, where I think flooding is going to become an increasing issue. Thinking about it when we're building our stations, and not just thinking about it at like the most basic level, like, oh yes, we're going to have drainage in the station, but like if we're building a station in an area like, say, Corktown in Toronto, near the Portlands, or some of the areas in the southern part of Montreal, or the northern part of Montreal, where there tends to be a lot of flooding, like Pierrefonds Roxborough, I believe is the name, then we really need to think about, like, okay, how do we put like super strong, powerful pumps and water storage tanks into these stations and integrate them so that if there's really bad flooding, we don't have to shut down train service for a week, for example, if there's like a Hurricane Sandy level crazy flooding event and try to avoid the system getting damaged. When I talk about earthquakes in Vancouver, it's less about let's prevent the system from collapsing entirely. I don't think it's necessarily the case that a system is going to be totally devastated in an event like an earthquake, but if it makes the system unworkable for like 6 months because 2 sections of guideway are like ajar, well, that's super damaging, and it's basically as good as the whole system not working for a couple months, because in huge areas of the Vancouver SkyTrain are, you can't repair the trains if you don't have that direct track connection, except for, doing some really extreme things like lifting trains off or whatever. And so I think that just building for more resiliency is something we need to think a lot about, because when there is a crazy event like a wildfire or an earthquake or a flood, which is becoming more common every year, I think that we're going to be really thankful that we thought about those decisions. And I think in many cases, it doesn't have to cost a ton more. It's really just a design decision that you make when you're designing it. You can build in, maybe it increases the cost by 10-20%, but I think increasing a project cost by 10% is probably worth it, versus like, having a system totally out of order for months or even like a year, like in some of the cases of stations after Hurricane Sandy. And so that's kind of something I've been thinking a lot about, and I think it's an important thing that we all consider going forward, especially with the way the climate is changing. I think that systems that are designed to kind of take that into account are going to benefit in the long run from it. And so, yeah, I think that's a smart decision. Anyways, that's the video for today, guys. Updates on some news topics, etc. If you want to reach out, please do so on Discord. We have a lot of this kind of stuff gets posted on Discord, and that's not always where I find out about different news items, but it's really cool to have a community where you can see a lot of news items and they get discussed and stuff. And so I recommend you go check it out. Otherwise, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next week. Thanks.